student who came over to me at the beginning of the week asked me a question that made me realize we have to discuss this issue. It made me a little bit sad. He asked me why we put so much emphasis on learning Gemara. It made me sad because think about a person spending time in yeshiva, especially yeshiva such as this, that spends most of the day learning Gemara. I think that there are people who are doing that and aren't sure why. It must be difficult to motivate yourself to do something and not sure why you're doing it. And it's obviously a question that requires answering. So it also made me sad because I realized that I should have dealt with this question in the Sikha at the beginning of the year, not at the end of it. But I think that hopefully what I'll present tonight as an approach to this question. I hope that my approach has something new for you and something that that is different than what you've heard before, and that it could be helpful to you going forward. So I'd like to share with you a couple of answers that I don't think are sufficient, but they're valuable. They're valuable answers. I want to share them as a backdrop to what my answer is going to be. Answer number one that I don't think is sufficient. Doesn't mean I think it's wrong. I'm choosing my words carefully. I just don't think it's sufficient. Is an article that I found online. I did a simple thing. After the student asked me the question, I went to Google, which is the modern equivalent of the Greeks going to the Oracle. And I asked the holy Google, I just typed into Google, why do we learn Gemara? And the number one link was an article that I'm going to read to you. Written by a guy in Detroit, named Rabbi Levi Burnham. It was published on the OU's website. A couple of guys in yeshiva were passing it around today. A few of you might have read it. At the 1994 awards dinner given by the American Association for Forensic Science, the AAFS president, Don Harper Mills, astounded his audience in San Diego with the legal complications of a bizarre death. Here's the story. On March 23, 1994, a medical examiner viewed the body of Ronald Opus and concluded that he died from a shotgun wound to the head. The decedent, the deceased person, had jumped from the top of a 10-story building intending to commit suicide. He left a note indicating his despondency. He was depressed. He wanted to commit suicide. As he fell past the 9th floor, his life was interrupted by a shotgun blast through a window which killed him instantly. Neither the shooter nor the decedent was aware that a safety net had been erected at the 8th floor level to protect some window washers, and that Ronald Opus would not have been able to complete his suicide in any case because of this. Everyone got it so far? Guy jumped off the 10th floor, and as he passed the 9th floor, was shot. And then landed in the safety net by the 8th floor, where he would have landed had he not been shot. He would have landed there alive, having tried to commit suicide. Instead, he was killed on the way down. Okay? Ordinarily, Dr. Mills continued, a person who sets out to commit suicide ultimately succeeds, even though the mechanism might not be what he intended. That Mr. Opus was shot on the way to certain death 9 stories below probably would not have changed his mode of death from suicide to homicide. But the fact that his suicidal intent would not have been successful due to the safety net caused the medical examiner to feel that he had not a suicide but a homicide on his hands. The room on the 9th floor, from whence the shotgun blast emanated, was occupied by an elderly man and his wife. At the time of the event, they were arguing, and the man was threatening his wife with a shotgun. He was so upset that when he pulled the trigger, he completely missed his wife, and the pellets went through the window, striking Ronald Opus. Now, when one intends to kill subject A, but kills subject B in the attempt, one is guilty of the murder of subject B, right? He tried to kill his wife, instead he killed this guy, so he should be guilty of murder. Thus, the investigation turned to the old man as the murderer of Ronald Opus, as the killer of Ronald Opus. When confronted with this charge, the old man and his wife were both adamant that neither of them knew that the shotgun was loaded. The old man said that it was his long-standing habit to threaten his wife with an unloaded shotgun. He had no intention to murder her, therefore the killing of Opus appeared to be an accident. That is, the gun had been accidentally loaded. The continuing investigation turned up a witness who saw the old couple's son loading the shotgun approximately 6 weeks prior to the fatal incident. It transpired that the old lady had cut off her son's financial support. And the son, knowing the propensity of his father to use the shotgun threateningly, loaded the gun with the expectation that the next time his father used it in a threat, he would shoot his mother. The case now becomes one of murder on the part of the son. Now it's the son murdering the guy coming out the window, Ronald Opus. There was an exquisite twist. Further investigation revealed that the son, one Ronald Opus, had become increasingly despondent over the failure of his attempt to engineer his mother's murder, which led him to jump off the 10-story building, only to be killed by a shotgun blast through the 9th-story window. The medical examiner then closed the case as a suicide. Ronald Opus killing himself. I first read about this case, continues, back in the late 90s, somewhere online, and couldn't believe it. I printed it, folded it up, carried it with me everywhere, and constantly took it out to read it to people who were as astounded as I. Recently, while reading something entirely unrelated, I remembered this story. I researched it on the net and found out that the story never happened. Even has a little parentheses here where it says, look how rude I am. Get all excited. This is actually a famous speech. I remember also when this went out on the internet, when this guy made this speech and invented this case. He wasn't trying to think it was true. He invented it. We'll see in a moment. In fact, I think it was a Hollywood movie that enacted that case near the beginning of it. I never saw the movie, but I heard that in the movie, whoever made the movie also might have thought that it was real. And they talked about it as though it actually happened. It never happened. This case never happened. Okay. The truth is that the story was told by Dr. Mills at the dinner, not as a true story, but as a hypothetical one. It became an urban myth that it happened in the late 90s. I remember. He did not tell it as a true story, but as a hypothetical one. The purpose was to take people to the extreme reaches of possibility. Way past the realms of probability, in order to flesh out the truest parameters of the law. Regular cases don't test the boundaries because they can be defined too easily. Only when going to the extreme can we discern the essence of each law, where it begins and where it ends. With this knowledge, a person gets a feel for what underlies the law, and what the lawmaker really wanted to achieve. So while the average Joe doesn't need to know these cases, the American Association for Forensic Science, a group of people intensely interested in the inner workings of the law, have a strong desire to study this type of case. Why am I telling you all of this? Because this story explains the way in which hundreds of thousands of frum people occupy themselves for hours every day. They study Gemara. People often have a difficulty understanding why Jews devote so much time to tomes full of scenarios that are never going to come their way. Right, a guy throws a gat off the balcony, bursts into flames, where was it? It's never going to happen. Besides the laws, all the laws involving livestock, temple sacrifices, and ritual purity which don't seem relevant to us in our day and age, there are also cases which seem so far-fetched as to border on impossibility. Such is the case of a weasel climbing into a cow's womb, swallowing a fetus, coming out, going back in, and regurgitating the fetus. It's a case in a sugi. The question the Gemara was grappling with in that scenario was whether or not the animal was considered born. Or the case of a person who knew he had a rock on his lap, then forgot that he had a rock on his lap, then got up and the rock rolled off and killed someone. Another sugi. The Gemara even openly tells us that certain things discussed never happened and never will, such as the Ben Sower Ramora. You guys know what Ben Sower Ramora is? That's the rebellious son, or the Irani Dacha. So why are our husbands, children, and brothers? I guess this guy doesn't believe that women should be learning Gemara. Okay. Why are our husbands, children, and brothers devoting thousands of hours a year to studying these things? Because Jews, apparently male ones only, because Jews, like the American Association for Forensic Science, have an intense desire to understand the lawmaker's desire, to comprehend the principles that lie beneath all the laws of the Torah. Studying only pertinent laws, such as the laws of Kashrut, Tzitzit, and Shabbat, would not necessarily allow them to plumb the depths of Torah understanding or the boundaries of its wisdom. To get the greatest understanding of the Torah and its writer, we need to go to the furthest reaches and analyze things at the edge. That's an exclamation point at the end of the article. I'm not sure what. I'm supposed to say that out loud. And analyze things at the edge! Now, this is a very nice answer. Why we learn Gemara? My God, the creator. Torah is the user's manual. When I study Gemara, I get into the mind of God and I get to understand Him even better. Now, I'll tell you why I find this answer to be insufficient. It's interesting. It's a very nice approach. But I think that it is insufficient. I believe it's insufficient for two reasons. Number one, there's no need for me then to study Gemara. While it's a different aspect of the mind of God, I could just as easily be studying Chumash or some other area of Torah and be analyzing a different aspect of the mind of God. All kinds of things. I can learn Ben Sower Ramora out of it. And there are other aspects of God's mind than that which is in the Gemara. Secondly, if I want to understand God, if I have a great desire to understand the Creator, I could go a completely different route, and I could study science. And I could also find out many fascinating things about the Creator by studying science. This does not fully satisfy me why this is the goal. Why this is why we study Gemara. It's a nice article. It's nice and it's reads well. Good luck. I asked Rav Herzig what he thought of this question. Why do people study Gemara? At first he was like, what else is there to do? Just like, why do we study Gemara? Why do we study Gemara? But his answer, which I also feel is insufficient, I'll share with you. His answer was very short. He said, study Gemara. You learn how to think. So you learn how to think. What that means is that for the rest of your life, if you learn Gemara, if you learn Gemara, Shonim, really learn it, he says for the rest of your life, when any situation comes up, you have the ability to analyze it. And you know what's a good answer, what's a bad answer, what's valid as an argument, what's invalid as an argument. It sharpens the mind. And those are things that you take with you to every aspect of life. You need to be his language was to be a seichel-dickie human being. I'm seichel. Develop seichel. So I said to Herzog, I said, that's insufficient. I said, because what you're saying is that studying Gemara is a means, not an end in and of itself. It's exercise that develops certain intellectual muscles. And he said, okay, you're right. It's insufficient. He admitted the flaw in the argument. So that's also an insufficient answer, or a partial answer, I should say. And I suppose there are other approaches you can take. Arya Sklar was telling me today he had some time to print out a 40-page article that deals with questions of why we learn Gemara. Told him I wasn't interested. If you're interested in reading a 40-page article about this topic, go up to Arya Sklar and he'll send you the link. All right?
Yeah, sure.
Who wrote the article?
Some guy in the group.
You guys that's it?
It's like a rabbi in the group,
Oh.
like a young, 20 years old.
20-year-old rabbi. Okay. Okay.
He's a son.
20-year-old rabbi.
Young guy. I don't know. Apparently, he went to
All right. Now, I'd like to present my animamin, what I believe. Because you could ask 10 different rabbis why we learn Gemara, and give you 10 different answers. And I guess there's a kernel of truth in all of them. There's a lot of good reasons to do this activity of Gemara. But I'd like to share with you my approach to this question, and it will incorporate the Herzog's answer. It will incorporate his name, Rabbi Burnham, Rabbi Levi Burnham's answer, and some of the other things that Chazal say about them. So to answer the question, why is learning Gemara important, I think we have to ask ourselves a more fundamental question, which is, why is it important to learn Torah at all? Okay, because Gemara is an aspect. Obviously, the question will boil down to why do we treat it as the most important aspect, but it is part of Torah. So I think it's valuable to us to explore the question, why do we learn Torah? Why is that a mitzvah? Why is that so important? I forgot probably the most common answer you get when you ask people why we learn Gemara, and that is they say, so that we know what the halacha is and what to do. It's a very insufficient answer, because there are much quicker and easier and more straightforward ways to know what to do. Very inefficient. One of the poorly written and poorly organized law books of all time, if it's a law book, is the Gemara. Not much of a law book. If anyone ever tells you the Talmud is a law book, send them to me. It's one bad law book. So why is Torah learning important? Let's ask the question more accurately. Because Torah learning is not just important. We're told, in all the texts and all the statements and all the slogans we've heard, that Torah learning is the most important mitzvah. Talmud Torah Keneged Kula. Keneged Kula. Torah is the number one thing. Jews throughout the ages gave their lives to study Torah. Think about it. Jews, think about it like in the Warsaw Ghetto, people hiding out in the cellar, risking their lives to study some Torah. The Asara Haruge Malchut, the Akiva, had his flesh combed off of his body. Why? Because there was a prohibition against teaching Torah, and he was teaching Torah. Why is it so important? Why is teaching Torah so important? Take a break. What? And then we have the Rashi at the beginning of the Chumash, not the first Rashi, not the famous one about Eretz Yisrael. The next Rashi says, why was start the word Bereshit, Rashi darshans word Bereshit. He brings a pasuk that Am Yisrael is called Bereshit, It brings a pasuk that says the Torah is called Reshit. So why was the world created? For the Torah. Bereshit. The world was created. That Be means can also mean for. The world was created for the Torah. The world was created for the Torah. The world was created for the Torah. The gas barbecue was created for the user's manual. Doesn't make any sense. What do you mean the world was created for the Torah? Isn't the Torah the user's manual for the world? That's supposed to mean the world was created for the Torah. We have to understand what these ideas mean. The Torah is the most important thing. It's more important than life. It's more important than the world. What's that supposed to mean? Now, if we're going to say that the world was created for the Torah, the world was created for the Torah, and that the most important thing is learning Torah, the most important mitzvah is learning Torah, it's connected kulam, it's the number one mitzvah. Not only that, God created the world, God looked into the Torah and created the world. Like the Torah is the most important thing. So, if that's true, so we have to ask the question beyond, why is it important to learn Torah? Start with why is it important to learn Gemara. Then we went to why is it important to learn Torah. Now I have another question. What's the purpose of the world? If the world was created for Torah, what do we know about what the purpose of the world is? And we shouldn't say we don't know. We don't know what the meaning of life is. It's not true. We do. There's a purpose to the world. There's a goal. There's an end game. God created the world, and there's a goal that it's all leading towards. Right? What's that goal? We have different names for it. We call it Geula, the end of days. We call it Bayomahu Yeh Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad. The purpose is that the end of the whole story, this whole big thing, this whole big game, the whole end of the whole thing is that everybody recognizes God. Right? That's the goal of creation. Goal of creation, God created a world. He created a world, and He created human beings who had free will. Let's go all the way back to the beginning of the creation, right? He creates a human being that has free will. You read Derech Hashem B'Adar Nochal. This is just like, open up and read the first couple chapters. God creates the world, creates a being that can recognize Him through his own free will. In order for that to have any meaning, He gives the being a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov, and He gives the being an opportunity to choose good and evil. And that fills the discovery and recognition and acceptance of God, that fills it with meaning, etc., etc. Things fall apart, people start forgetting about God. Okay, God gives the Torah on Har Sinai. Right? And the whole goal is that we get back to a point where everyone on earth, the collective Adam, recognizes God. That's the whole purpose of the whole thing. Right? Forgive my gross generalizations. But that's what it's all about. Now, it's an interesting thing. If that's the purpose of creation, there's a funny thing about this whole end of days redemption, perfected world, tikkun olam, whatever you want to call it. There's a funny thing about it. Is that it's all in the mind. What do I mean it's all in the mind? It's all a matter, the whole goal is that everyone have a certain perception. Right? Meaning, if we get to the point where, Bayomahu Yeh Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, if we get to the point where everybody recognizes God as their God, and everyone accepts His value system, and everyone believes in God, and everyone accepts the value system of God, and everyone knows the truth, and the moral system that God wants for the world is accepted by everybody. So that's it. But that means that it's all a matter of everyone sharing a worldview. Right? The goal of everything is that everyone come around through their free will, through their understanding of things, to a certain perception of godliness. The goal of everything. Okay. What is that perception? Are there any people who have it already? Who has that perception? Who's already achieved it? Who is there in the world that we can point to and say, if everyone thought the way those people do, then the Jewish description of the end of days where everyone recognizes God will be there. Are there any people now who believe that? Well, sure, there's lots of them. Famous line you guys are all familiar with. Kol hashoneh halachot b'chol yom, muvtach lo shu ben olam haba. Anyone who studies halacha every day, it is certain that that person is a ben olam haba. It's interesting that Shas ends with that line. It's the last line in Shas. And it's got nothing to do with the sugya that precedes it. On that Amud, there's a sugya about Hilchos Nida that precedes it. The Gemara just ends with that line. It's obviously deliberate. Shas ends with that line. Whoever studies halacha every day, it is certain that he is a ben olam haba. How would you translate that? Ben olam haba. Person who occupies, who lives in, is a product of. How would you translate ben then? When we use the term ben, like bar mitzvah. Bar mitzvah is not a son of a mitzvah. He's a person who is in the category of mitzvah. That line does not mean that a person studies halacha every day, he's going to merit olam haba. That's not what it means. It means he's going to get schar, he's going to get olam haba. What it means is that if a person studies halacha every day, the world in which he lives is olam haba. What does that mean? What, where he lives is a base of mikvah? To a certain extent, yes. Yisrael Salanter said, this is quoted in the introduction to the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch on Basar B'Chalav, written by Rav Aaron Pfeiffer, who's the Arts this week. He's a great Rav in South Africa. That's the way he used to. I think I once quoted this. It's a fascinating thing, the name of Yisrael Salanter. He says that, step out into the world, and there's all the problems we have in the world, the moral problems, there's no Beit HaMikdash, there's all kinds of issues. The world isn't the way it's supposed to be. Then you step into the base medrash. You open up Mishnayos, you read, and you open up Gemara and you read. There's Tumah and Tara, we're learning the Kiyasta, you wash your hands before you fill the cup or after you fill the cup because it's a Rishon and a Sheni and it's Tumah and there's Truma and there might be a Kohen there with Truma. The world that you live in, the world that you function in, the laws that you're describing when you're sitting and learning, you step into a world in which there's B'nai Din, there's Malchus, and there's Misas, and there's a Beis HaMikdash, and there's Truma, and there's Kohanim, and there's all kinds of. That's the world that you're living in this world. And there's all these nooks and crannies and issues that are being described in this essentially fictional world that exists in these books. And you're describing this world, and then you step back out into the world, and the world's not that. So a person who studies Torah every day is a ben olam haba. What does that mean? He lives in two worlds at the same time. He occupies l'havdil elef alfei avdalos. People who occupy some fantasy world or some video game, they live in that world for a period of time. Right? They live in that world and they live in reality. Well, and it affects their lives in significant ways. When we study Torah every day, we live in a world which is the perfect world. It doesn't exist in reality in the world, but it's a world that's being described to us. And we live in that world, and we function in that world, and we analyze different aspects of that world, and we live within that world. Ben olam haba. So, if the whole world is supposed to come to the same value system that the Torah is presenting, and there are people who live according to that value system, who believe in that value system, who take in that value system, then it's safe to say that if everyone had the same value system as those people, it would be done. End of story. And that is the purpose of the world. What is that value system? That value system is Torah. What is that way of seeing the world? It's Torah. The purpose Very simple pshat. When we say that the world was created for Torah, that's what it means. The purpose of the world was to create a context in which the world view, as laid out in the Torah, could be actual. The world was created for the Torah. That's the purpose of the whole thing. It's the purpose of the world. To be the platform, the playing field for the fulfillment of Torah. The world was created for Torah. Torah wasn't created for the world was created for Torah. Yeah. It says in Pirkei Avot that we're supposed to make God's will our will. Say with so, no with so. We're supposed to make God's will our will. Most people, and all of us to a certain extent, their value system, how they make choices in the world, how they interpret events, how they make moral choices, is influenced by the circumstances of the place and time in which they're born and raised. You live in a certain society, you get certain messages from it, you're affected by it. And that's your value system. And then as things happen in your world, you interact with them and you react to those things based on the value system you've taken. Now the Jewish people are an interesting people. Wherever they've lived throughout history, throughout the world, they've had this whole education system, this whole Torah, this whole value system that they've taken from Torah. And although Jews lived in all different parts of the world in all different times, that their primary value system, unlike everyone around them, their primary value system was not the circumstances of time and place where they happened to be born and raised. Their value system was this Torah. That's the value system they're functioning. So they were like a society within a society, like a subculture. There'd be a society, which was whatever it is, Middle Ages Poland. It has its own value systems and cultural ideas, and these Jews are learning, Perika Zoreg with the Ritva and the Tosfos and involved in Torah. And that's their value system, and that's how they interact with the world. That's how they relate to the world. That's their primary interface with the world is through the value system of Torah. So if you took a person who's immersed in Torah from nowadays and someone from 500 years ago from a different part of the world and someone from 500 years before that from another part of the world who were immersed in Torah, and you put them in a room together today, they can sit and talk and learn. And when moral questions come up, their reference points for dealing with those moral questions would be very similar. The more immersed in Torah they were, the more knowledgeable they are in Torah, the more similar their approaches to these questions are going to be. They'll be machlokot. But they're machlokot within a shared value system, a shared context. Okay, so let's just sum up what we've said so far. At this point, I've laid out why I believe that when we say Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, or the world was created for the Torah is the most important thing, what it means is that the entire actualization of this vision for the world that is supposed to be like the whole purpose of creation is a mindset that the whole world is supposed to share. That mindset is the application onto this world in thought and in action of the Torah. That's what it is. And therefore, to say that the world was created for the Torah is the most important thing. At that point, it's kind of obvious. Of course, that's the whole point. It's a mindset. So, now let's get to Gemara. What makes Gemara the most important? Well, Gemara is an interesting book. It's like I said, it's kind of a law book, but it's not really a law book. The Mishnah is a law book. The Shulchan Aruch is a law book. The Gemara is a book that analyzes laws. It breaks them down. It does what this guy at the Forensic Science Institute did, takes things to their extremes. develops underlying principles, presents dissenting opinions, why they're wrong, goes off on tangents about ethics and mystical ideas and moral questions and theological questions and comes back to the legal discussions. If you open up a Shulchan Aruch and read halachas, you will know what to do. You will know what to do. You will not know how to address a new situation. You will not have a certain pattern of thinking, so that when something comes up, your whole approach to it is from Torah. You won't have that by reading the Shulchan Aruch. If you just learn the Chumash is a very... the Chumash, it's the Word of God. But you'll very quickly, if you're learning the Chumash carefully and trying to figure out how to apply it to the world, you're essentially going to arrive at Gemara. If you're just learning it for Parshanut, so it's very nice, but it's not practical. Once you start, if you just took the Chumash and said, I want to try to figure out how to apply this to the world, you're just going to develop Torah Sheba'al Peh. Why reinvent the wheel? Everyone understand what I just said? When you open up a Gemara, I had a discussion with Adam Ben Ismail about this. We're talking about learning. When you open up a Gemara and learn, get back into this guy said here about the details. If we're supposed to have this perception of the world, asay ratzon ratzon, we're supposed to make God's will our will. What does that mean? That means when I interact with the world, things happen. I'm supposed to try to act in accordance with the will of God. Act in accordance with the will of God. Now, how do I do that? There's all sorts of detailed situations that arise. There's all sorts of complicated situations that God never told me what to do. So if I develop a pattern of thinking that is in line with the Torah, then my approach as things come up is going to be to approach it the way, through the mindset of Torah, through the value system of Torah. Besides the fact I'm actually going to know what to do in a lot of cases, because they will have been discussed. When I see the dissenting opinion that we don't hold like, and it's dealt with extensively, it helps me understand, we were discussing this today with Shammai and Behillel, it helps me understand why we do hold like the opinion we hold like. Now I have some of the underlying principles. And only in the Gemara do I have the combination of how to think and what to do, and moral questions, and patterns of, as Herzig was talking about, the Seichel. And what happens is, only through Gemara do I develop this way of thinking. It's the content and the form. It's the way of thinking which ultimately makes me into a Ben Olam Haba. I don't get it through any other area of Torah. You can't. There's also an educational reason to study Gemara, which is also very insufficient, which I tend to emphasize here when people talk about this question of studying Gemara, which is that it's what I call the super skill. If you want access to the Jewish library, if you sat and learned Chumash Rashi and learned every single Rashi in Chumash, it would not make you able to read a Gemara. But if you know how to read a page of Gemara clear, you'll probably be able to read a Rashi. Gemara, if you could read Gemara Rashi Tosos, if you could read Gemara, the basic Rishonim, just pretty much, as long as you had the aid of a dictionary for the occasional words you didn't know, you could read pretty much anything. Because the whole rest of the Torah library, ever since Shas was completed, is based on the lingo, the style, and ideas that appear in the Shas. So that is the doorway in. But again, this last thing I said is not the main reason why we put such emphasis on it. The reason we learn Gemara is because that's what makes us into a Ben Olam Haba. It's because that makes us one more person. I become a Ben Olam Haba. The goal isn't just to learn Perek HaZorah. It's just one little detail. Okay, so God gives us the Torah Himself. And it's this unimplementable, ideal text. It's the Word of God. If you tried to apply it to the world, it wouldn't work. Chumash is not really applicable to the realities of life in its form in the written text. So, we also have rules of interpretation and our human intellects and great minds over many generations that have tried to take this text and make it fit with the reality of life. And for every aspect of the reality of life, analyzed and asked questions and what's accurate and what did God really want, and is this the way we should do it, and is this how it works, and are we following the rules of the, does this fit into the system? And each time, every sugya I'm learning, no matter how much it doesn't feel like that spiritual an experience when I'm sitting there learning about going to get off a balcony and bursting into flames, or whatever it is, and there's a string attached to it, he's still holding it, and she's pulling it, and it lands on a piece of wood, and whatever. I'm analyzing an aspect of how the Torah translates into reality. And the more I do this, if I do this stuff, and then the next stuff, and then the next stuff, and I go through the whole Shas, and I learn, and I spend a lifetime with every day that I learn, and every piece that I learn, and every shir that I go to. And that is my main influence in life. I step out into the world, and I'm a Ben Olam Haba. If the goal is for everyone in the world to be a Ben Olam Haba, that's the end game. That's the end. That's the success of the entire creation. Then if I turn myself into someone who's got the right frame of mind, I am one more person who's there, who's arrived at the end. I have actualized the purpose of creation on the individual level. Of course, the goal is that everyone get there. But if I'm a Ben Olam Haba, I see the world through the lens of Torah. That's what it's all about. That's getting everyone to see the world through the lens of Torah. That's what we want. So learning Gemara, why we learn Gemara? We learn Gemara because it completes us. It makes us, it gets us where we have to go. It takes us away from having our value system and our way of thinking being mere circumstance of where we happen to be born and what time period. It connects us to something eternal. It connects us to God. And it connects us to our ultimate purpose in the future. Walby, Ali Shur, this will end. As a using Ali Shur is 2 volumes, and altogether it's like probably something like over 1,000 pages. The very first parak of the first volume of this great Musar work is called Limud Gemara. That's how he starts the whole work. But the importance of learning Gemara. And he says here, says, Kol echad halomed Torah mukhrach lilachem neged yidionotav. He's really talking to us here. He says, every person who enters into the world of Torah to learn must do battle with his imagination. This is the most serious conflict between truth and falsehood in the human being. Asher davka b'potchot ha'gemara. Davka, when he opens the Gemara, he gets attacked by all sorts of imaginations. I'll just say it in English. Past memories, worries about his future, things that bother him, little conflicts that he's having. The difficulty in concentration does not have its source in the lack of ability, rather in control of one's imagination. And the speed with which we are effective at pushing away the imagination that is bothering us On that depends the entry into learning and growth. One who goes into in-depth learning and knows how to push aside his imagination. By imagination means all the extraneous stuff. He feels the beauty and the taste of Torah. When enchanting imaginations, imaginary things, thoughts, when they enchant a person with all sorts of images of pleasures and enjoyments and matters of this world, it's difficult to find the flavor of spirituality with a clear and deep intellect. Only a person who frees himself of his imagination merits it. It goes on, it's a long chapter, about 5 pages. I close with this because I think very often when people ask the question, a lot of questions, there are philosophical questions, thought questions people have that are really coming from an emotional place and not an intellectual place. I haven't surveyed everyone in the room, but I strongly suspect that a lot of people who ask the question, why is it so important to learn Gemara, are asking it out of frustration and out of distraction. They're asking it as a philosophical question, but subconsciously or consciously, what's really bothering them is it's difficult, there's so many other things going on in life that I'm worried about, and I need answers about some other questions, and it's difficult, etc., etc., etc. And we need to reconnect with who we are. Every one of us is a descendant of someone along the way who was Moser Nefesh to stay Jewish. Because wherever we were in the Galus, it was time. And they stayed Jewish so that we could be here today. And we're sitting in Eretz Yisrael. Needs are taken care of. And we have the opportunity to get reconnected with that worldview that has connected us across space and time, Jews of all time and into the future, and is ultimately the picture that is being painted of the end, of the worldview that we're all supposed to have, the whole world is supposed to have. We're supposed to bring this into the world. And that's what we're doing here. That's why we don't come up. It doesn't feel like it when you're involved in a few lines in a sugya and you're breaking your teeth over it and you're dealing with some detail. But it's because you're dealing with the detail. Take a step back for a moment and remember that that's what we're doing. That's why we learn Gemara. And that's why we learn Torah. And in Yitzhak Hashem, we will take in that worldview. It doesn't just come from a shear here, a shear there, 1 year, and then we drop it. Learning Torah is something that's supposed to be part of the fabric of our lives. You kosher, you keep Shabbos, you daven, you learn Torah. That's going to be part of the fabric of our lives. And the goal is that we become B'nai Olam Haba. That we're part of the solution. We see the world the way, hopefully, everyone will see it. The whole world will recognize God. And we are the vehicle for that in the world.